Hello, wonderful listeners. A quick update for you. I have created a paid subscription for the podcast. For 99p a month, you can get an extra bonus episode per week and a monthly workshop episode where I go into a lot more depth, a lot more detail, and provide a lot more structure for your self-development. Now, whether you are a loyal long-term listener or just ready to go deeper on your self-development or just generally want to support the podcast, I would love to hear from you, and you can find the link for subscribing in the show notes. Enjoy the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Self-Improvement Project. I hope you are all well. I hope you have had a meaningful week, filling it with things that you enjoy and things that also stretch you slightly. These two things combined almost create a little bit of an idea that I've thought about today and created this episode on. And this episode is called Infinite Games versus Never Being Satisfied. Now that's quite a lot to absorb, and hopefully I'll give a little bit of context throughout this episode around what I mean by that, what my thoughts are. However, as with all these episodes that I do, I always feel like I'm touching the surface and there's an element of them that are unfinished. To that extent, I also feel like it's a platform for you to think. I very much feel like the content that I create gives you permission and allows you to think in your own way and interpret things in your own way. And that is what I want. That is my aim. I feel like it's quite dangerous when it's just one person talking about what they think, potentially claiming things that are factual. I just allow a platform for you to think. So today we're going to be thinking about infinite games versus never being satisfied. Now, let me define each one first before I talk about each of them separately and how they maybe coexist with each other. Infinite games means playing games forever. There's an element of expectation that doesn't exist with them. There's an acceptance that this will never end, and can go against the grain of our own thinking, the way that we're brought up in society of playing games that are finite, that have an end goal, that are an achievement, or they are achievement orientated. Now, they have a place, they have a time where they belong in life, where they are useful, but I feel like we're too heavily sided with the finite games. Infinite games are the things that we need to be more aware of and understand how they can benefit us, especially when it comes to meaning, when it comes to fulfillment, when it comes to happiness. And this is against the idea of never being satisfied. There's a few quotes that I like and are common knowledge, obviously, but fools are the only ones that are satisfied. Nobody in the world is ever satisfied or ever fully satisfied. These are ideas that exist and are hard to argue against. There's moments where you'll be satisfied if you think of that just pleasure as a concept, but there's the obvious downfall of pleasure as well. We can't be riding that high all the time. And I always remember how Mark Manson put it in one of his books, where he said that everybody, no matter how unhappy, happy, how rich, how poor, how stable, how unstable, everybody ends up alleviating at a 7 out of 10 rating on how they feel most of the time. There is no special formula that allows you to override that. It's just a fact of life. So I'm going to talk about how these two things coexist potentially complement each other, potentially exist alongside each other, and they're almost needed for each other. I believe that a lot of joy comes from accepting that games and life are being played infinitely. Take any situation in your life just now, whether that's work, whether that's relationships, whether that's a habit or a goal that you're working towards, and just take that mindset for a second and think about that existing forever, beyond your death. You will never have a time of closure for it. It is just something that will always exist in your life as long as you look after it. You're not doing it for any gain. You're not doing it for any ego or any status or any external means. You are just doing it because that is who you are. And if you just think of how that makes you feel for a second, notice that feeling and how either significant it is to deepening your commitment to it, or whether that actually makes you think you're in the wrong place right now. This infinite idea brings peace. It brings peace of mind. It brings inner peace. It brings an openness to, regardless of what obstacles or things, challenges that you face, that you will continue along that path. Because it doesn't matter if you fail or if you win, you will just continue doing it. A personal example of this is this podcast. I have no end goal in sight. I thoroughly enjoy this experience. It brings me satisfaction, fulfillment, meaning, joy. But if I had external means from it that I relied upon for me to turn up and do it, it wouldn't bring me joy. There's times when sorrow comes from never being satisfied. If we use that example that I just used around status, goals, and trying to reach achievements, we have two levels. We have when we achieve it, we disregard it and move on to the next goal or the next level. Or we never reach it. We undershoot it, or we land just below it. Both of these outcomes result in us never being satisfied. And that sorrow is constant because we're choosing to live that way. Now, I'm not saying that never being satisfied is a purely negative thing, but it comes from a negative place. It potentially comes from fear and feeling like we need to potentially fulfill ambition, or we're not going to live up to the expectations that we have put upon ourselves or that others have put upon us. Never being satisfied comes from this negative area of having to find meaning in our lives. I don't know what my meaning is, therefore I am not satisfied. Therefore, I am unhappy. So, there's an element here about how can we turn never being satisfied into a positive. Well, let's look at these infinite games that we are playing. These things that we relieve the pressure of having to achieve. But how about we explore that idea of accepting never being satisfied whilst playing infinite games. I talked at the start about this coexistence between the two. And we can't just be happy all the time. Unhappiness exists because of happiness. But we can't enjoy one without having the other. There's an element or a question here around how can we use unhappiness to enhance our happiness? How can we use never being satisfied to our advantage when we're playing infinite games? There's a potential misjudgment here of playing finite games and never being satisfied. That is a recipe for a life of misery. Now, there's some things that can be connotated negatively depending on the side of the argument that you sit on. Just as a tangent of an example, I feel recently I've shifted from feeling anti-work for a number of years due to various factors and that having a negative connotation, but now seeing through experience, through observing different perspectives, the benefits of work and almost seeing that as a positive thing in our life. So flipping our perspective of negative and positive connotations can potentially help here. How can we positively look at never being satisfied? Our drive and ambition would not be as strong if we were satisfied. If we had goals in mind that we wanted to work towards, knowing that it could be infinite, we need to look at our drive and ambition and never being satisfied with the end result, despite knowing that it will never end. Obviously a tricky combination there, but one for you to think about how you would approach. Progress and meaning in our lives is seen as a bit of a holy grail and positive. But how can we relate that to never being satisfied? Meaning will always evolve. Meaning is infinite. There will be times in your life that 5 years ago, some things brought you meaning that don't bring you meaning now. There are things that bring you meaning now that won't bring you meaning in 5 years. Your idea of progress or your perception of progress has changed as well. Progress and meaning will never end. But if you combine that with your drive and ambition and never being satisfied, whilst ensuring that it is positive meaning or positive progress, this leads us back to that idea of having inner peace within ourselves, peace of mind around everything that we've done. And balancing inner peace and peace of mind with never being satisfied, you're almost you're trying to find a happy medium with those, a balance. But it's a very fine balance. I guess how I would wrap up today is asking you a few questions, such as, what games do you want to be playing forever? What things in your life bring overriding peace and stillness? When you ask yourself this question, I feel personally it's helped, but it might help you as well to clarify what your values are currently and observing how they evolve through time. being aware of knowing that you're going to be playing infinitely is important, and it's important to implement. But understanding that never being satisfied will also always exist. Knowing that we can make it a positive rather than a shadow over us, rather than it being daunting. There's an element of striving that exists with both of these in an optimistic manner. You want to, an aim from this as well, from this episode, will be trying to define what you're striving for and trying to define what you define as being more than you. Beyond this finite mindset. Thinking infinitely. What is beyond you that you are always going to work towards regardless of the outcome. Whilst also never being satisfied. It almost brings an overriding peace when we think about it like that. And that's us today, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that has allowed you to think more about your mindset, your perspective around what you're doing and why you're doing it. As I said at the start, all these episodes, I believe, are always unfinished business. So I might build upon these thoughts in the future. But as always, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you all next time. Cheers. Hey guys, me again. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're not ready for the Becoming Unstuck in 30 Days self-led course quite yet, why don't you try my free ebook I created? 5 simple steps to improve yourself and your life. I made this during the very first lockdown of the pandemic, in the early days of the self-improvement project. It's a quick go-to when you're feeling unsure what to work on when improving yourself or your lifestyle. And the great starting point if you're trying to figure out how to live a more fulfilling and simple life. The link for this will be in the show notes for you. Have a good one.